The unemployment rate of India is high and rising. At 7.9%, it is lower than Brazil's 13.9%, close to France's 7.3% and Australia's 7.1%, and much higher than UK's 4.7% and US's 4.2%. There are many reasons for the rising unemployment rate, both in India as well as globally, the most important of which is, of course, the ongoing pandemic. But there are other reasons too, some specific, some structural. Will India be able to break out of this jobs stalemate? Where are the jobs? What should job seekers do to get them? To discuss these issues, we have with us Mr. Ajay Dua, former Secretary of Department of Commerce and Industry, Government of India. He joins us from New Delhi. Mr. R. Jagannathan, Editorial Director of Swaraj from Bangalore. And Ms. Shalini Sharma, Professor of Economics at Christ University. She joins us from Delhi. Welcome, everybody. I'll begin with you, Mr. Dua. Since you have been part of the government, you have seen budgets being made at very close. You had a very close look at how budgets are made. And every budget after budget, we keep talking about how jobs are not coming. There was a small period in the middle where jobs were doing well. But overall, India constantly seems to be lagging in job creation on the policy front as well as on the execution front. What is happening? Can you please tell us?
First, thank you for having me on your channel. The important issue which you raised about unemployment, I don't think can be disputed at all about the state of affairs in the country. Given our population, we invariably and almost perennially had high unemployment in the country. This has been accentuated by the pandemic, but our problem is somewhat, I would say, further compounded because we are all guessing the level of unemployment. The government, which used to put out the data through the National Labour Institute till about 3 years ago, has stopped doing that. I'm not ascribing motives to it, but it's obvious that the government didn't want a bleaker picture to be put out in public domain. And for quite some time, till very recently, even the national consumption expenditure, which used to give some indication of the jobs on the job front, that was not also being released. Having said that, I would say that it is the organized sector in India, and with which I've been associated for almost a score of years, both in the state government of Maharashtra as well as the federal government in different capacities. There we are really lagging behind. Not even 10% of our entire labor force is employed in the organized sector, about which only we have definite data. The 90% which is in the unorganized or the informal sector, we only keep guessing about the level of employment there. Having said that, let me say estimates have been put out by reliable research institutions, including the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, CMIE, which has been doing a good service in measuring week after week the unemployment and the employment intensities, by saying that during the pandemic, 120 million jobs had gone away.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dua. Mr. Jagannathan, I'll now come to you. Mr. Dua has talked about the government social security scheme, which is Manrega, and that's an important backup mechanism. But I think the jobs problem, and as you wrote very articulately in your 2018 book called The Jobs Crisis in India, is more than simply Manrega. It's more complex than just the government funding or creating schemes. For instance, you have mentioned that in order for more jobs to happen, labor has to move from agriculture to industry, And in our last discussion, you said even that is not good enough because the growth sectors are in the services. Do you still stand by 4 years later? Do you stand by this argument? Or do you think the change in the face of the changed data, you have also changed your view?
No, in fact, I have become much more committed to my view because I have not seen anything that has changed the thing. What has really happened during the pandemic is that a lot of people have been forced to go back to agriculture as a backup because there is what I would call underemployment there, but it is not being captured in the unemployment statistics, which say a CMIE or others. Because unemployment, what is the definition? The number of people willing to work as opposed to the total people in the labor force. Right. So if fewer people are willing to work, unemployment rate might fall, but actual number of people without work may be quite large. So the structural issues confronting us are quite different. First, regardless of the pandemic, the structural issue is that ever since for the last 15 to 20 years, GDP and output has been determined more by additional investments of capital rather than additions of labor. The employment elasticity of the economy has dramatically come down. This started happening in the West somewhere after the 1990s and the arrival of the internet and the computer age. In our case, it started somewhere after Vajpayee's era of 2004, which was the last time when we had good jobs growth. We had a small spike during 2009-11 when there was an extremely high stimulus program launched by the UPA government. But after that, for the last 10 years, we have had a jobs drought. Why has this happened? Because output can be increased without increases in labor deployment. And our inability to get two things done. One is change labor laws where flexibility in labor employment and retrenchment is allowed. And two, reduce the number of regulations where jobs can be created at the bottom end of the market. That has not happened. So even today we have legislated 4 labor codes, but we have not actually put them into it. In 2018, Arun Jaitley in his last major budget said that fixed term labor contracts will be allowed in textiles and leather, apparel and leather, and it was extended to all sectors in the next budget. But so far we haven't seen a spike in what it means is that we have liberalized our labor laws too late. So now we have to live with two realities. One, jobs are going to be negative in agriculture. It will be marginally positive in manufacturing as the productivity-linked incentives start taking root. But 90% of the new job creation will be in services. Even manufacturing and agriculture have to integrate services into their business models, or else you're not going to succeed. The era of manufacturing-led growth is over. What you will get is manufacturing creating jobs in the tertiary sector services. Like, for example, I'll give you an area. Asian Paints is a paint manufacturer, but the real growth will come in providing services. I mean, more than 3 decades ago, Xerox realized that people don't want copiers, they want copies. Copies is a service. Copiers is a manufacturing product. So similarly, people don't want paints. They want their houses painted, cars painted, whatever they want painted. So services is where the growth will be. And the sooner we realize that this is where we need to really expand our incentivization for growth and labor flexibility, I think we realize.
I'll come back to you on this point, Mr. Jagannathan. I'll just rush to Ms. Shalini Sharma, who has a completely different point of view in the sense that she is looking beyond jobs into the self-employment and startup ecosystem, or new jobs coming from the startup ecosystem. Ms. Sharma, do you think the new startup ecosystem is large enough to accommodate the kind of unemployment numbers that we are talking about?
Okay, so as Sir was very rightly telling us about the service sector, and we need to create more jobs in the service sector, very correctly said, Sir. And even in the manufacturing, though, it is quite less. But the scenario which we see in the academics as of now, we do have a shift towards skill-oriented education, which is, we are also pushing the students towards startup and entrepreneurship. And we see a lot of opportunities available in Startup India, in Make in India, in demographic dividend which we have. And if we are using that demographic dividend with the skills to go ahead with the Startup India, I think there is a lot of opportunities for the young Indians. So yes, of course, there are 2-3 levels of people there. There are people with semi-skilled, people skilled, and those who do not have the skills and which are almost in the agriculture sector, which are not there at all. So, looking at it, yes, Startup India, a lot of boost is being given. We are seeing a lot of our students starting up their businesses. They're also linking agriculture with the service sector, and a lot of things are happening. So I'm quite hopeful with all that. And even the education system is coming out with skill-oriented backup. So that is also something which is actually quite positive to look at. So if I talk about, let me talk about the educational scenario and the Startup India and the Make in India. Lots of students are getting employed. So I will not have a question mark over that. Because lots of avenues have also opened up. So with the internet revolution also, lots of services are being provided. And I look at it in a very positive manner because we also know that the world is also looking towards India, looking at our own demographic dividend. The world is also looking towards us. And with the backlash going on with China, we are a important destination for the world to look at us for.
Thank you, Ms. Sharma. Thank you very much. Mr. Dua, I'm going to come back to you with a very sad event that happened recently when thousands of young men applied for railway jobs, and because of some anomaly in the question paper began to destroy railway property. Now, this is only the tip of the iceberg. The brutal question is the government going to be the engine of job creation? Is the aspiration of a young India a government job because of the security it brings, because of the unaccountability it has? What is happening here? Can you read this? Can you read into this incident and tell us?
It is highly unfortunate that the government sector, be it the central or the states, has to be looked upon as the engine of employment in the country. Everybody knows that the government jobs might provide you security, but they do not provide the kind of satisfaction, the job satisfaction, which must come along with it, which we should be nurturing in the country as a whole. There, the role of the private sector would remain primary, and I would say it is employment created in organized industry, employment created in the informal sector, and given our GDP mix, services, as my colleagues have mentioned, would remain extremely important. But we have also seen that services jobs do depend to a large extent upon how much is the investment taking place in manufacturing. The ratio is 5:1, the rule of thumb. One job created in manufacturing, given our intensity of manufacturing, creates as many as 5 to 6 jobs in the services sector. More FDI comes in manufacturing, more people will come to India. There will be much greater hospitality industry, business-related industry, etc. The two go together. So that's where I'm slightly different from Mr. Jagannathan on that.
Thank you, Mr. Dua. I'll come back to you, Mr. Dua. Mr. Jagannathan, I'm coming to you on another issue which is related to what Ms. Sharma mentioned a little while ago and what Mr. Dua has been trying to articulate in a different way. Is unemployment the issue, or is it employability? Because a lot of companies talk about saying that, yes, there are lots of people out there who want the jobs and we have many jobs to give. But the people who come are not employable. They are not skilled enough. They are not willing to learn, etc., etc. These are the arguments that we have heard. Is employability an important chunk of the job creation in the private sector? And how important is it, Mr. Jagannathan?
Yeah, two things. It is not at all an unemployment problem. We have actually two problems. One is unemployability, which means low skilling. Without higher skilling, you are not going to be employable. Second thing, it's also a wage problem. In fact, if you noticed some time back, you talked about the public sector is being seen by many as the only place where you can get a decent job. Why is it so? Because the wage differential between an unproductive public sector and a productive private sector is so high that PhDs are willing to apply for a peon's job in a government sector, right? Whether it is UPSC or even civil services at the bottom rung, class 3, class 4 kind of jobs. So there are two issues. One is skilling, and the second thing is the huge wage differential between public sector and private sector. So jobs are not going to happen, should not happen much in the public sector, because public sector, there's a huge scope for increases in productivity, even without adding any staff, except in one or two areas like, say, policing or law enforcement. In all other areas, public sector actually needs to shrink. As far that, only then will you see jobs growing in the private sector, and the jobs will be maximum in areas of services. And as Ms. Shalini said, it has to be startups. Large companies, organized sector will not create jobs, even whether they are in manufacturing or not. The 1:5 ratio that we talked about is probably long dead, because you have an Adidas factory in Germany where there are 5 or 6 workers producing millions of shoes through 3D processes. So very few people are actually employed in manufacturing. But manufacturing is important in order to create the services thing. So it may be more like 1:10 ratio, that one manufacturing job might actually create 10 or 15 in services. So services is the area to focus on. Manufacturing is needed purely as an enabler of service sector jobs, and the maximum jobs will be in startups. Startups may fail after 5 years, but during that 5 years, they create employment, which means we need regulations that allow for early exit of failures and constant renewal by the creation of newer and newer startups. This is our challenge. If we are able to get this done, we'll be fine.
Thank you, Mr. Jagannathan. Ms. Sharma, I come back to you. It seems Mr. Jagannathan is fully in tune with what you have been saying. My only question is the following. It is the jump from an unorganized sector to an organized sector, that is, in terms of number of people whom you can hire, suddenly increases the compliances burden on entrepreneurs multifold. From zero, you go to a 500 plus compliances in a moment. The moment you become organized sector, the moment you have more than 20 people, the moment you cross a certain investment limit or a turnover, etc. So how are startups geared up for that? Isn't the regulatory ecosystem hostile to startups? And I speak this knowing fully well that we've had 44 unicorns last year.
So I'll go from the personal experiences of, let me say, my students around me. And yes, what you're saying is very correct. But yes, there is also a gestation period before a startup actually becomes the type of company you're talking about, where all the regulations have to be maintained. I think they are geared up slowly and gradually over a period of process, a time period, and then they are geared up to give all those, hold all those liabilities. But in the initial stage, we do have hand-holding by the government as well. We do have lots of funding being given by the institutions, by the government, and that is another reason that these startups are actually booming. And I'm seeing a lot of startups in the agriculture-linked areas as well. So there's a lot of startups going on. There is so much thought process of the youth, which is so much different. But when you listen to them, you know that, okay, this is also a possibility which can be created and which can be demanded in the market. So I would just go back to your question once again. It is a process. By the time they come to that level, I think they will be attuned enough to take over the responsibilities. Meanwhile, there is a lot of hand-holding for them, lots of tax benefits being given, lots of money being given for startups, provided, of course, the starters are up to that level, lot of employment being generated. Now here, both types of employment is being generated. of the unskilled workers, if you are in the agriculture sector, as well as the skilled workers. So that also situation is being tackled by the startups. And then a lot of incentive is also being given to MSMEs also as of now.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Sharma. I come back to you, Mr. Dua, for the last chunk of our discussion, which is that what should now we do? Because we are hearing things about how compliances are keeping companies small. They don't want to enter the compliance universe. It is openly hostile, and it has been so for several decades. Do you think an ease of compliances will create ease of jobs? Do you think it's time for the government, for the state, to start backtracking on the kind of hostility that its regulatory system has created over the past 75 years?
I would wholly agree with that point of view. But having said that, let me just point out one thing, that the central government may not have been able to pass the hire and fire provisions under the Industrial Disputes Act, the Industrial Disputes Act, etc., in 2015, and had left it to the state governments. Since then, 13 of the 29 states have enacted their own laws. By and large, most of the BJP states are in it, and they are led by Gujarat, Rajasthan, though not at that point of time a BJP state had also followed. So there is a degree of, we tend to make a lot more of the labor flexibility in hiring and firing not being available than what is currently the position. But the fact that the government has not been able to notify the 4 labor codes which it has over the years, experience of years, several governments brought about, got them passed from the parliament, but after the rule making, it's still waiting, probably for political reasons, elections around the corner, etc. So those labor codes must be notified, and all of them taken together are an exercise in reducing the requirement for compliance.
Thank you, Mr. Dua.
That's number one. Okay. Second, if I might very quickly say, the services which we have to encourage have to be not only industry labor, industry linked, but also construction, housing. That can be a major employer, and that is a sector which I look forward to in the budget being looked at again benignly and supported, so that the jobs, both unskilled as well as skilled jobs, and largely is contract labor there, which would find jobs.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Dua. Mr. Jagannathan, I come to you now, taking Mr. Dua's ideas forward, which in turn has come from ground up in terms of excessive compliance excesses and hostility to entrepreneurs. Do you think there is a political angle in this economic? Because every logic says labor laws need to be reformed. The 4 labor codes, in my opinion, are inadequate. They are just putting together the 43 union laws and several state laws under 4 codes. Labor codes, minimum wage and industrial disputes and so on. But I don't think they're adequate. I think if we want to create more jobs in the organized sector, if we want to formalize more MSMEs or unorganized companies into the organized sector, if we want to broaden the formalization process, these laws have to be repealed, they have to be amended. But then there is a political angle. How do you read into these between the political economy of labor laws? How do you see this?
Yeah, I mean, you're completely right that these laws are simply not enough. But I would say most organized sector has found a workaround through them. And even the new startups, you have to divide them into 2 categories. One is the tech startups, who are not actually impacted too much by what the labor law says. So they are all in the high skilled area where labor laws are not that material, right? So and the other side of the small is the micro and small and street vending and those kind of things which are totally informal, which again are not impacted by labor laws. It is the sector that is maximum impacted by poor labor laws or restrictive is the middle sector, which is technology compliant and also job creating. good quality jobs. It is the middle sector that is being eviscerated by labor laws, as technology is replacing all middle skill, middle level jobs. If you see banking, who needs to go to a bank branch anymore? You don't even need to go to the ATM. You don't need a credit card. Everything is done through your phone. So all the mid-skill jobs which you used to have in the services sector like banking or insurance is now being done through technology. So the point is, unless and until you create the middle sector, even in the banking sector where people will be hired and you may need physical presence, you are not going to get good quality jobs. But you will get jobs at the upper end, high skill, and at the lower end, low skill. The middle sector is where the jobs are being lost, and that is where the labor codes actually could help if they were better. So that is where I think your thing is valid. But one more political issue which you mentioned. The real problem here is the states are happy to blame the center for everything that goes wrong in jobs or in the job market. But the fact is most of the regulations are at the state level, whether you talk about land, water supply, electric connection, everything is at the state level, and the state level is highly corrupt. So they're happy to blame the center for it, whereas they need to get more power so that they stop blaming the center and say that, okay, this is my job. If I don't create jobs in West Bengal or Madhya Pradesh or Maharashtra, it is my problem. It is not Delhi's problem, because Delhi has liberalized, but states have not done it with equal aggression.
Thank you, Mr. Jagannathan. Ms. Sharma, last word to you. What do you think we need to do? What do you think India needs to do? Maybe in the budget, but even going forward, even if it's a policy intent, where should India move towards for job creation?
I think the ease of doing business, that index, we need to badly look into it. There is a healthy competition going on among the states of attracting FDIs, FIIs, and lots of job creation through that is also going on. I think that's quite a positive direction. Then we also need to go in towards the $5 trillion economy, which has been emphasized so many times by the Honorable Prime Minister, and even the SDGs, which we are trying to go towards and implement them by 2030. So, keeping all these scenarios in mind, a healthy competition among the states, the way ease of doing business, creating more startups, giving more entrepreneurship culture to the state, helping the infrastructure to grow. And I think those are the basic requirements. And with that, to the best of my belief, we should be able to have more startups. We will be able to have more going towards the right direction. And of course, construction, as Sir had said, the growth of the economy we look at from the construction going on in the economy. So that is something that is boosting. I do see construction everywhere around me these days, in fact. So lots of road work is being done. So government is also trying to do whatever is possible for them. Lots of roads have been made during the pandemic so that every type of employment is taking place. So I think it's a positive scenario. I wouldn't look at it from any other angle. And I again end up with the saying that the demographic dividend that we have and exploiting that demographic dividend with the right skills is what we actually require to do now.
Thank you, Ms. Sharma. So Mr. Dua says the state needs to recede. Mr. Jagannathan says productivity needs to rise, and the middle chunk of businesses need to be given greater freedom. And Ms. Sharma says that the interstate ease of doing business competition needs to be taken forward. Thank you very much for being here, Mr. Dua, Mr. Jagannathan, Ms. Sharma. We hope the government takes your views seriously. Thank you.
Thank you for having us over.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.